The mansion stood alone on the edge of town, its towering structure casting long shadows over the overgrown gardens. It had been empty for years, a relic of the past, but now it was home to Lydia, a deaf woman who had long since grown accustomed to the quiet world she inhabited. For her, silence wasn't frightening, it was her reality. In fact, the silence was one of the reasons she had been drawn to the house. The isolation and peace it promised seemed perfect for her new start. Lydia had always been fiercely independent, never letting her deafness limit her. She was an artist, and she found that her world of silence allowed her to focus deeply on her work, free from distractions. The old mansion, with its high ceilings and grand, empty rooms, would be the perfect place for her to create. She felt at ease as she unpacked her belongings and began to settle into her new home. The first few days passed uneventfully. Lydia spent her time exploring the house, getting a feel for the space. The rooms were vast, filled with antique furniture that had long been covered in dust. There was a sense of history in the air, as though the walls held secrets from another time. Lydia's favorite room was the library, a grand space with floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with old books. She imagined the previous owners sitting by the fireplace, reading late into the night. But as the days wore on, a strange feeling began to settle over her. It wasn't something she could explain easily, and it wasn't something she could hear. It was more of a presence, like she wasn't alone in the house. Lydia, being deaf, had learned to be highly sensitive to other forms of communication, vibrations, movements, shifts in the air. And now, she was beginning to notice subtle, unsettling changes in her environment. One evening, while painting in her studio, she felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, even though all the windows were closed. She paused, looking around. The light flickered briefly, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Lydia frowned, setting her brush down. Something was off, but she couldn't quite place what it was. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to her work, trying to push the strange sensation from her mind. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Lydia noticed the door to her bedroom was slightly ajar, even though she was certain she had closed it. She shrugged it off, thinking she must have forgotten. But as she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the feeling of being watched crept over her again. She turned her head toward the door, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure standing there, just beyond the threshold. Her heart raced as she sat up, but when she blinked, the figure was gone. It was nothing, she told herself, just her mind playing tricks. The next day, as Lydia went about her routine, she began to notice more odd things. Objects weren't where she had left them. Her paintbrushes were scattered across the table, though she always kept them neatly arranged. The old chandelier in the dining room would swing gently, as if disturbed by a breeze, though there was no wind. And sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, she would catch a glimpse of movement, something flickering in the shadows. Lydia tried to brush it all off as her imagination. After all, the house was old. It creaked and shifted as old houses do. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing day, and she couldn't shake the sense that something was very wrong.